The water was cold as death when Wade Callahan pulled the woman's body from the Arkansas River that September morning in 1882. Her long, dark hair streaming like ribbons of night across his arms as he dragged her onto the muddy bank. Her lips were blue, her face pale as moonlight, and for a moment he thought he was too late, that whatever had brought her to this grim fate had already claimed her completely. But then he saw it, the faintest flutter beneath her eyelids, a tiny movement that spoke of life still clinging stubbornly to her waterlogged frame. Wade had seen enough death in his 30 years to know the difference between gone and going, and this woman was still fighting. He rolled her onto her side, water pouring from her mouth in a brackish stream. His hands moved with practiced urgency, pressing against her back, working to expel the river from her lungs. Nothing. Her chest remained still, her body limp as a rag doll. Wade's heart hammered against his ribs. He had pulled drowning calves from flooding streams, had once saved a young boy who had fallen through winter ice, but this was different. This woman, whoever she was, deserved more than to die alone in the muddy shallows of the Arkansas River. Without hesitation, Wade turned her onto her back and tilted her head, pinching her nose closed. He had learned this technique from an old army surgeon during his brief stint in the cavalry, though he had never imagined using it like this. He pressed his mouth to hers and breathed, filling her lungs with air, then pressed on her chest the way the surgeon had shown him. Once, twice, 3 times. He breathed into her again, tasting river water and something sweeter, something that spoke of lavender soap and desperation. Come on, he thought fiercely. Come on, lady. Do not give up now. He breathed again, pressed again, his muscles straining with the effort. The sun was climbing higher over the Kansas plains, burning off the morning mist that hung low over the water. Wade's horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Chester, stood nearby, watching with patient eyes as his master fought to save a stranger's life. Then she coughed. It was a weak, sputtering sound, but it was the most beautiful thing Wade had ever heard. Water erupted from her mouth as her body convulsed, her lungs finally expelling the river that had tried to claim her. Wade rolled her onto her side again, supporting her shoulders as she choked and gasped, her whole frame shaking with the violence of her revival. "That is it," Wade said, his voice rough with relief. "Get it out. You are all right now. You are safe." Her eyes opened, and Wade found himself staring into the most striking blue eyes he had ever seen. They were the color of a summer sky just before a storm, bright and intense and filled with confusion. She stared at him like she did not know where she was or how she had gotten there, and Wade supposed she probably did not. "Easy," he said softly, the way he would speak to a spooked horse. "You are safe. I found you in the river. Can you tell me your name?" She opened her mouth, but only a raspy croak emerged. She coughed again, then tried once more. "Maggie," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Maggie Fletcher." "Wade Callahan," he replied, keeping his hand steady on her shoulder. "Can you sit up, Miss Fletcher? We need to get you somewhere warm and dry." With his help, Maggie managed to push herself into a sitting position. She was shaking violently now, her wet clothes clinging to her frame. Wade could see she was younger than he had initially thought, probably no more than 22 or 23, with delicate features and skin that would have been fair if it were not currently tinged with blue. "What happened?" she asked, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "How did I end up in the river?" "I was hoping you could tell me that," Wade said. He shrugged out of his canvas jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. "I was riding along the bank and saw you floating face down. Do you remember anything?" Maggie closed her eyes, and Wade could see her struggling to pull memories from wherever they had gone. Her face was pale, Her breathing still labored, but at least she was breathing. That was what mattered. "There were men," she said finally, her voice stronger now though still rough. "3 of them. They stopped our wagon yesterday afternoon. Pa tried to fight them off, but they shot him. They shot Ma too. I ran and they chased me. I remember running through the darkness, and then there was the river, and I thought if I could just cross it I might lose them. But the current was so strong and I could not swim well enough. I went under and everything went dark." Wade felt his jaw tighten. Outlaws. The territory was crawling with them, men who preyed on settlers and travelers, taking what they wanted and leaving death in their wake. He had encountered his share over the years, and each time it left a bitter taste in his mouth. "Where did this happen?" he asked. Maggie opened her eyes and looked around, clearly trying to orient herself. "I do not know. We were traveling west from Missouri, heading toward Camp Verde in Arizona Territory. Pa had heard there was work there, good land. We were maybe a week out from Dodge City when they attacked. I do not know how far I ran or how long I was in the water." Wade did some quick calculations in his head. If she had gone into the river yesterday evening and he had found her this morning, she must have been in the water for hours. It was a miracle she had survived at all. The fact that she had washed up in a relatively shallow area where he happened to be passing was the kind of luck that made a man believe in divine providence. "We need to get you to a doctor," Wade said. "Dodge City is about 15 miles north. Can you ride?" Maggie nodded, though Wade could see the effort it cost her. "I think so. But my parents, I have to go back for them. I have to know if they are truly gone." Wade understood the impulse, but he also knew that her parents were likely dead if what she had described was accurate. Still, he could see the desperate hope in her eyes, and he would not take that away from her until he had to. "First, we get you to safety," he said firmly. "Then we will figure out what to do next. Can you stand?" With Wade's support, Maggie managed to get to her feet, though her legs were unsteady and she swayed dangerously. Wade caught her around the waist, steadying her, and he could feel how cold she still was through his jacket and her wet clothes. "I am going to put you on my horse," he said. "Chester here is gentle as a lamb. He will take good care of you." Wade lifted Maggie onto Chester's back with more ease than he expected. She was light, too light, and he wondered when she had last had a proper meal. The life of a settler traveling west was hard, and many families arrived at their destinations half-starved and exhausted. He swung up behind her, settling into the saddle and pulling her back against his chest so she would not fall. She was still shaking, and Wade wrapped one arm around her waist to hold her steady while he gathered the reins with the other. "Hold on," he said, and urged Chester into a steady walk. They rode in silence for a while, following the river north toward Dodge City. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and Wade could feel some of the tension leaving Maggie's body as the cold gradually released its grip on her. She leaned back against him, and Wade tried not to think about how right it felt to have her there, this stranger he had pulled from the river less than an hour ago. "Why were you out here?" Maggie asked after a while, her voice still hoarse but growing stronger. "By the river, I mean." "I am a cattle driver," Wade explained. "Or I was. Just finished a drive up from Texas to Dodge. I was heading back south, taking my time when I spotted you. Sometimes I prefer to travel alone, take the scenic route. Guess it was lucky for you that I did." "Lucky," Maggie repeated, and there was something hollow in her voice. "I suppose so, though it does not feel very lucky to have lost everything and everyone." Wade did not know what to say to that. He had lost people too, his parents to cholera when he was 18, a younger brother to a riding accident a few years after that. But he had never lost his entire family in one violent moment the way Maggie had. The words of comfort that came to mind all seemed inadequate, so he simply tightened his arm around her waist, hoping she would understand that he was there, that she was not alone anymore. They reached the outskirts of Dodge City as the sun reached its zenith. The town sprawled before them, a jumble of wooden buildings and dirt streets, alive with activity. Cowboys on horseback rode past them, and the sounds of hammering and sawing filled the air as construction crews worked on new buildings. Dodge City was booming, growing fat on the cattle trade that brought thousands of head through every season. Wade guided Chester down Front Street, past saloons and general stores, until he reached a modest building with a painted sign that read Dr. Samuel Morton, Physician. He dismounted and helped Maggie down, keeping a steady hand on her elbow as her feet touched the ground. "Can you walk?" he asked. Maggie nodded, though Wade noticed she kept one hand on Chester's saddle for support. Together, they made their way to the doctor's door, and Wade knocked firmly. The man who answered was older, maybe 60, with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He took one look at Maggie's bedraggled state and stepped aside immediately. "Bring her in," Dr. Morton said briskly. "What happened?" "Found her in the river," Wade explained as he helped Maggie into the examination room. "She was face down, not breathing. I got her lungs working again, but she has been in the cold water for hours. Her family was attacked by outlaws yesterday." Dr. Morton's expression darkened. "Outlaws?" "Yes, we have had reports of a gang operating in the area. 3 men riding together, robbing and killing. The marshal has been trying to track them down for weeks." He turned to Maggie, his voice gentling. "Let me examine you, young lady. We need to make sure you do not have any injuries beyond the obvious." Wade started to step out to give them privacy, but Maggie reached out and caught his hand. "Please stay," she said, and there was such raw vulnerability in her eyes that Wade could not refuse. "I will be right here," he promised, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. Dr. Morton worked efficiently, checking Maggie's breathing, listening to her lungs, examining her for injuries. He found bruises on her arms and legs, likely from being tumbled by the river, and a nasty gash on her shoulder that Wade had not noticed. But overall, she had been remarkably lucky. "You will live," Dr. Morton said finally, wrapping a clean bandage around Maggie's shoulder. "Your lungs sound clear, which is good. Sometimes water in the lungs leads to pneumonia, but I do not hear any concerning sounds. Still, I want you to rest for a few days. You have been through a terrible ordeal and your body needs time to recover." "I do not have anywhere to rest," Maggie said quietly. "I do not have anything at all." Dr. Morton exchanged a look with Wade, and Wade felt something shift in his chest. He had been planning to head back to Texas, maybe sign on with another cattle outfit for the season. But looking at Maggie sitting there, wrapped in his jacket, her hair still damp from the river, he knew he could not just ride away and leave her to fend for herself. "You can stay with me," Wade heard himself say. "I have a room at the boarding house on 3rd Street. It is not much, but it is clean and safe. You can have the room and I will find somewhere else to sleep until you get back on your feet." Maggie looked at him with surprise. "I cannot ask you to do that. You have already done so much." "You are not asking," Wade said firmly. "I am offering. Besides, you do not have many other options right now, Miss Fletcher. Let me help you." The gratitude in her eyes made Wade's throat tight. He turned away, fumbling for his money pouch to pay Dr. Morton, and tried to ignore the strange feeling blooming in his chest. He had known this woman for less than 3 hours, had pulled her half dead from a river, and already he was rearranging his life to accommodate her. It was foolish and impractical and completely unlike him. And yet, he could not bring himself to regret it. "Doctor." Morton provided Maggie with a clean dress that had belonged to his late wife, and she changed in the back room while Wade waited. When she emerged, her hair was combed and pinned back, and though she was still pale and hollow-eyed, she looked more like a person and less like a drowned ghost. Wade paid the doctor and led Maggie back out to where Chester waited patiently. This time, when Wade helped her onto the horse, she did not need as much support. The food and water Dr. Morton had given her had helped, and color was beginning to return to her cheeks. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, a formidable woman in her 50s who took one look at Maggie and immediately went into mothering mode. Within minutes, she had Maggie installed in Wade's room with fresh linens, hot soup, and stern instructions to rest. Wade found himself standing in the hallway, his belongings hastily gathered in his saddlebags, wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the room and fixed him with a knowing look. "That girl has been through hell," she said quietly. "Good of you to help her, Mr. Callahan. There is a room available on the first floor, smaller than yours but adequate. You can have it for the same rate." "Thank you, madam," Wade said. "I appreciate it." Mrs. Patterson patted his arm. "You are a good man. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." Wade settled into his new room, smaller but comfortable enough, and tried to think through what came next. Maggie had mentioned that her family had been traveling to Camp Verde in Arizona territory. If her parents were truly dead, she had no family there waiting for her. No family anywhere, most likely. She was alone in the world, vulnerable and grieving. The thought made Wade's chest ache. He knew what it was like to be alone, to have no one to rely on but yourself. He had built a life for himself through sheer stubbornness and hard work, but it had been a lonely life. He drifted from place to place, hiring on with different outfits, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. It was easier that way, he had always told himself. No attachments meant no pain when it was time to move on. But now, thinking about Maggie alone in that room upstairs, he found himself questioning that philosophy. Wade spent the rest of the day taking care of practical matters. He reported the attack to the marshal, a tough older man named Garrett who listened grimly, and promised to send men out to search for Maggie's parents' bodies and the wagon. Wade also stopped by the general store and bought Maggie some basic necessities: a hairbrush, soap, a few changes of clothes that he hoped would fit. He felt awkward selecting women's clothing, but the store owner's wife helped him, and he walked out with a bundle of simple but serviceable garments. When he returned to the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson told him that Maggie was sleeping, which was probably for the best. Wade left the bundle of supplies outside her door with a brief note, then retreated to his own room to clean up. That evening, there was a soft knock on his door. Wade opened it to find Maggie standing there, wearing one of the dresses he had purchased. It was a simple blue cotton dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was loose around her shoulders, still slightly damp. "May I come in?" she asked. Wade stepped aside, suddenly very aware of how small his room was. There was barely space for the narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. Maggie sat in the chair and Wade perched on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "I wanted to thank you," Maggie said, "for everything. The doctor, the clothes, this room. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Wade said. "Anyone would have done the same." Maggie shook her head. "No, they would not have. Most people would have left me in the river, or if they had pulled me out, they would have done their duty and moved on. But you saved my life and then you stayed. You are still staying. Why?" Wade did not have a good answer for that. He looked at Maggie, at the way the lamplight caught in her hair, at the vulnerability and strength warring in her eyes, and he felt that strange tightness in his chest again. "I guess I could not just leave you," he said finally. "It did not feel right." Maggie was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "The marshal came to see me this afternoon. He said his men found the wagon. They found my parents too. They are dead, just like I thought. They are going to bury them tomorrow morning in the town cemetery." Wade felt his heart clench. "I am sorry, Maggie. Truly, I am." A tear rolled down her cheek and then another. Maggie tried to brush them away, but they kept coming, and suddenly she was crying in earnest, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. Without thinking, Wade crossed the small space between them and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "It is all right," he said softly. "Let it out. You have every right to grieve." Maggie leaned forward, and Wade pulled her into his arms, holding her as she sobbed. He could feel her pain as if it were his own, and he wished desperately that he could take it away, that he could undo what had been done and give her back her family. But all he could do was hold her and let her cry, so that was what he did. Eventually, the storm of tears subsided and Maggie pulled back, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to fall apart like that." "You have nothing to apologize for," Wade said firmly. "You have been through something terrible. You are allowed to feel it." Maggie looked at him with something like wonder. "Who are you, Wade Callahan? What kind of man pulls a stranger from a river and then treats her with such kindness?" Wade felt his face grow warm. "Just a man, Maggie, nothing special." "I think you are special," she said quietly. "I think you might be the best man I have ever met." Wade did not know what to say to that, so he simply squeezed her hands and stood. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a hard day." Maggie nodded and rose from the chair. She paused at the door and looked back at him. "Will you come with me? To the funeral, I mean. I do not want to face it alone." "Of course," Wade said without hesitation. "I will be right there with you." The funeral was held the next morning in the small cemetery on the edge of town. It was a simple affair, just Maggie, Wade, Marshal Garrett, and the preacher. 2 plain wooden coffins were lowered into the ground side by side, and the preacher said words about dust and ashes and eternal rest. Maggie stood beside Wade, her hand clutched tightly in his, and she did not cry. She stood straight and strong, her face set like stone, and Wade admired her courage even as he worried about what she was holding inside. After the funeral, Marshal Garrett pulled Wade aside. "Those outlaws who killed her folks," he said quietly. "We have been tracking them for weeks, but they always seem to be one step ahead. They are smart, careful, but they made a mistake this time. They left the wagon intact and we found tracks leading south. I have got men following the trail." "Good," Wade said grimly. "I hope you catch them." "If we do, there will be a trial," Garrett said. "The young lady might need to testify about what happened." Wade nodded. "If it comes to that, I will make sure she is ready." Over the following days, Wade and Maggie fell into a strange sort of routine. She was staying in his old room, and he visited her each morning to check on her and see if she needed anything. They would have breakfast together in the boarding house dining room, and then Wade would find tasks to occupy his day while Maggie rested and tried to regain her strength. But increasingly, Wade found his thoughts turning to Maggie even when he was not with her. He would be grooming Chester or mending a piece of tack, and suddenly he would think of something funny she had said at breakfast, or the way her eyes lit up when she smiled. It was disconcerting and unfamiliar, and Wade did not quite know what to make of it. For her part, Maggie seemed to be healing, at least physically. The hollow look left her eyes and color returned to her cheeks. She was eating better, sleeping through the nights. But Wade could see the grief that still weighed on her, the sadness that lurked just beneath the surface of every smile. One evening, about a week after Wade had pulled Maggie from the river, They were sitting together on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set over the town. It was a beautiful evening, warm and still, with the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. "I have been thinking about what comes next," Maggie said quietly. "I cannot stay here forever, living on your charity. I need to make a life for myself somehow." Wade felt his stomach drop. He had been trying not to think about the future, about the day when Maggie would inevitably move on and he would have to let her go. But hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way that frightened him. "What will you do?" he asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral. Maggie was quiet for a moment. "I do not know. Pa was planning to homestead in Camp Verde. He had filed the claim before we left Missouri. I suppose that claim might still be valid, though I would have to get there and file the proper paperwork. But the thought of going all that way alone, of trying to work a claim by myself, it terrifies me." "You do not have to do it alone," Wade said before he could stop himself. "I could go with you, help you get established." Maggie turned to look at him, and Wade saw surprise in her eyes. "You would do that? Leave Dodge City and travel all the way to Arizona Territory with me?" Wade took a deep breath. He had not planned to say any of this, but now that the words were out, he found he meant them. "Maggie, I have been drifting for years, going from place to place with no real purpose. But this past week, helping you, being with you, it has felt different. It has felt like maybe I have found something worth staying for. So yes, I would go with you to Camp Verde. I would help you build a life there, if you will let me." Maggie's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Wade, I do not understand. Why would you do all that for me? We barely know each other." "Maybe we do not know everything about each other," Wade said. "But I know the important things. I know you are brave and strong. I know you have been through hell and you are still standing. I know that when I am with you, I feel like I have finally found the place I am supposed to be. That has to count for something." A tear rolled down Maggie's cheek, but she was smiling. "It counts for everything," she whispered. "Wade, I feel it too, this connection between us. I do not understand it, but I do not want to fight it either. If you truly want to come with me to Camp Verde, I would be grateful, more than grateful." Wade reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Then it is settled. We will go together." They sat there on the porch, hands clasped, watching the last light fade from the sky, and Wade felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was what had been missing from his life all these years. Not a place, but a person. Someone to share the journey with, someone to build a future with. He had found that person in the most unlikely way imaginable, pulled her from a river and breathed life back into her lungs, and now she was breathing life back into him. The next few weeks were a flurry of preparation. Wade sold Chester, though it pained him to part with the faithful horse, and used the money to purchase supplies for the journey west. They would travel by train as far as they could, then by stagecoach and on horseback for the final leg to Camp Verde. It would be a long journey, but Wade found himself looking forward to it. Every day spent traveling with Maggie was another day to get to know her better, to build the foundation of whatever it was growing between them. Marshal Garrett came to see them the day before they were set to leave. He brought good news. His men had tracked down the outlaws who had killed Maggie's parents. There had been a shootout, and all 3 men were dead. Justice had been served, rough and final the way it often was in the territories. Maggie received the news with quiet relief. "At least they cannot hurt anyone else," she said. "At least there is that." Wade wrapped an arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. They had become more physically comfortable with each other over the past weeks, though Wade was careful to maintain propriety. He cared about Maggie too much to risk damaging her reputation. Even in a rough town like Dodge City, where people were generally too busy minding their own business to worry about others. They left Dodge City on a crisp October morning, boarding the westbound train with their belongings packed into two small trunks. Maggie wore a new traveling dress that Wade had insisted on buying her, a deep green that complemented her coloring, and a sturdy bonnet to protect her face from the sun. She looked beautiful and brave, and Wade felt a surge of pride that she had chosen to make this journey with him. The train carried them west across Kansas and into Colorado, the landscape gradually changing from flat prairie to rolling hills to the dramatic peaks of the Rocky Mountains. They stayed in modest hotels along the way, always in separate rooms, and spent their days talking, learning about each other. Wade learned that Maggie had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, that she loved to read but had rarely had access to books, that she could sew and cook, and had once raised an orphaned lamb that followed her around like a dog. He learned that she was 22 years old, just as he had guessed, and that she had never been courted seriously because her father had been protective, and the young men in their area had been either too poor or too rough for his standards. Maggie learned that Wade was 30, that he had been working cattle drives since he was 19, that he had once dreamed of owning his own ranch, but had never had the capital to make it happen. She learned that he was kind but could be hard when necessary, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh, that he was deeply lonely even if he had not admitted it to himself, until recently. With each passing day, the bond between them deepened. Wade found himself increasingly drawn to Maggie, not just physically, though he could not deny the attraction, but emotionally. She was becoming his closest friend, his confidante, the person he wanted to share every thought and experience with, and he could see that she felt the same way. It was there in the way her eyes sought him out in a crowded station, in the way she smiled when he made a joke, in the way her hand would find his when they walked together. They reached Prescott, Arizona Territory, in late October, and from there they took a stagecoach north to Camp Verde. The landscape was different from anything either of them had seen before, harsh and beautiful with red rocks and towering saguaro cacti and endless blue skies. The air was dry and warm even as autumn deepened, a welcome change from the cold they had left behind. Camp Verde itself was a small settlement clustered around a military fort that had been established to protect settlers from Apache raids. The raids had largely stopped in recent years, but the fort remained, and the town had grown up around it, serving the soldiers and the ranchers and farmers who were slowly colonizing the Verde Valley. Maggie's father's claim was located about 5 miles outside of town, along the Verde River. Wade rented horses from the local livery, and they rode out to see the property on their first full day in Camp Verde. The land was beautiful, Wade had to admit. The claim was 160 acres of river-bottom land, rich and green even in late October. There were cottonwood trees along the river and good grazing land stretching back toward the hills. Someone had started to clear a spot for a cabin near the river, and there were stacks of cut logs waiting to be assembled. "Pa must have paid someone to start the work before we arrived," Maggie said, dismounting and walking over to examine the logs. He was so excited about this place. He talked about it constantly during the journey. Wade could hear the sadness in her voice, but also something else. Hope, perhaps. Or determination. He dismounted and joined her, looking around at the land with a practiced eye. "It is good land," he said. "With some work you could build a fine homestead here. There is water from the river, good soil for crops. You could even run some cattle on the back acreage." "We could build a fine homestead," Maggie corrected quietly. "You are still planning to stay, are not you? Wade turned to look at her, and what he saw in her eyes made his heart race. There was fear there, fear that he might leave her after all, but also something warmer, something that looked remarkably like love. "I am staying," Wade said firmly. "For as long as you will have me, Maggie, I am staying." Maggie closed the distance between them, and before Wade quite realized what was happening, she was in his arms. He held her close, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his chest, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt completely at peace. "Wade," Maggie said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I need to tell you something. I need you to know how I feel." Wade pulled back just enough to see her face. "What is it?" Maggie took a deep breath. "I love you. I know it has only been a few weeks since you pulled me from that river, and I know it seems too soon to feel this way. But I cannot deny it anymore. You saved my life, Wade, but you have done more than that. You have shown me what it means to be truly cared for. You have given me hope when I had none. You have made me want to live again, to build a future. And I want that future to be with you." Wade felt like his heart might burst from his chest. He had hoped, of course he had hoped, but hearing Maggie say the words out loud was something else entirely. "Maggie Fletcher," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since the moment you opened your eyes and looked at me on that riverbank. I know I am just a cowboy with nothing much to offer, but if you will have me, I swear I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." Maggie laughed, and it was the most joyful sound Wade had ever heard. "You have everything to offer," she said. "You have yourself, and that is all I need." Wade bent his head and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion as Maggie responded, her arms wrapping around his neck. It was not their first kiss. That had happened a few days earlier in a quiet moment during their journey, but it felt different somehow. It felt like a promise, a commitment, the beginning of something permanent. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade kept his arms around Maggie's waist, not ready to let her go yet. "We should get married," he said. "As soon as possible. I want to do this right, Maggie. I want you to be my wife." Maggie's eyes sparkled with happiness. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Wade, I will marry you." They were married a week later in the small church in Camp Verde, with the preacher officiating and a few locals they had met serving as witnesses. Maggie wore a simple white dress that the preacher's wife had helped her make, and Wade wore his best shirt and pants, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. It was not a grand wedding, but it was perfect. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed Maggie with all the love he felt for her, and he heard the witnesses clapping and cheering in approval. That night, they stayed in a room at the hotel in town, their first night as a married couple. Wade was gentle with Maggie, patient and loving, and when they lay together afterward, tangled in the sheets in each other's arms, he felt a contentment he had never imagined possible. "I love you, Mrs. Callahan," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too, Mr. Callahan," Maggie replied, and Wade could hear the smile in her voice. They moved out to the claim the next day, setting up a temporary camp near the logs that would eventually become their cabin. It was hard work, but they tackled it together. Wade had experience with construction from his years working ranches, and Maggie proved to be a quick learner and a tireless worker. They rose with the sun each day and worked until dark, building their cabin log by log, board by board. The community in Camp Verde proved welcoming. Neighbors stopped by to help with the heavy work of raising the cabin walls, and the women brought food and advice. Wade and Maggie made friends quickly, and Wade found himself part of a community in a way he had never been before. It felt good, solid, like putting down roots after years of drifting. By Christmas, the cabin was finished. It was small, just 2 rooms, but it was sturdy and tight, with a good fireplace and real glass windows that Wade had ordered from Prescott. Maggie made curtains from fabric she purchased in town, and Wade built furniture, a table, chairs, a bed frame. They were building a home together, and every nail Wade hammered, every meal Maggie cooked, felt like another stitch binding their lives together. The winter was mild by the standards of what they had known in Missouri and Kansas, though the nights could be cold. Wade and Maggie would sit by the fire in the evenings, reading to each other from the few books they owned or simply talking about their dreams for the future. They wanted to expand the cabin eventually, add more rooms. They talked about planting crops in the spring, maybe buying some cattle. And they talked about children, about the family they would build together. Spring came early to the Verde Valley, and with it came planting season. Wade broke ground for a vegetable garden near the cabin, and Maggie planted seeds she had carefully selected: tomatoes, beans, squash, corn. She also planted flowers, because she said a home needed beauty as well as function, and Wade could not argue with that. Wade purchased 10 head of cattle from a rancher on the other side of the valley, good stock that would form the foundation of their herd. He built a small corral and spent his days repairing fences and clearing more land for grazing. It was backbreaking work, but Wade loved it. This was his land now, his and Maggie's, and every drop of sweat he shed felt like an investment in their future. In May, Maggie told Wade she was pregnant. They were sitting at the dinner table when she made the announcement, her cheeks flushed with excitement and nervousness. Wade stared at her for a long moment, letting the words sink in, and then a grin split his face so wide it almost hurt. "Truly?" he asked, standing up so fast his chair nearly toppled backward. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be," Maggie said, laughing at his reaction. "I have missed my courses twice now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. I think it is real, Wade. We are going to have a baby." Wade crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. Maggie shrieked with laughter, clutching his shoulders, and when he set her down, Wade kissed her deeply. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he said when they broke apart. "I love you so much, Maggie." "I love you too," she replied, her eyes shining. "I cannot wait to meet our baby." The months of Maggie's pregnancy passed in a blur of activity and anticipation. Wade found himself constantly worrying about her, insisting she rest more and take on less of the heavy work. Maggie tolerated his hovering with good humor, though she insisted she was perfectly capable of continuing her regular tasks. Still, Wade could not help himself. The thought of anything happening to Maggie or the baby terrified him in a way that nothing else ever had. As summer turned to fall, Maggie's belly grew round and full, and Wade would lie awake at night with his hand on her stomach, feeling their child move and kick. It was the most miraculous thing he had ever experienced, proof that he and Maggie had created a new life together. In early January, nearly 16 months after Wade had pulled Maggie from the Arkansas River, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, and Wade spent most of it pacing outside the cabin while the midwife and several neighbor women attended to Maggie inside. He could hear her cries of pain, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. He had faced down charging cattle and dangerous outlaws without flinching, but listening to his wife in pain and being unable to help her was the hardest thing he had ever endured. Finally, just as the sun was rising, he heard a new sound, the thin, wailing cry of a newborn. Wade rushed to the door and the midwife opened it, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Callahan," she said. "A healthy baby boy, and your wife is doing well." Wade nearly collapsed with relief. He entered the cabin to find Maggie propped up in their bed, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket, and when Wade approached, she pulled the blanket back to reveal their son's face. He was perfect. Tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were already trying to focus on the world around him. Wade reached out with one finger and stroked the baby's cheek, marveling at how soft his skin was. "He is beautiful," Wade said, his voice choked with emotion. "You did so well, Maggie. I am so proud of you." "I want to name him after my father," Maggie said softly. "Marcus. Marcus William Callahan. Is that all right with you?" Wade nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He knew how much Maggie still missed her parents, and naming their son after her father felt right. "Marcus William," he said finally. "It is perfect." Over the following weeks, Wade discovered that taking care of a newborn was more work than he had ever imagined. Marcus was a good baby, but he needed to be fed constantly, changed constantly, held constantly. Wade and Maggie took turns walking the floor with him during the long nights when he would not settle, and Wade learned to function on far less sleep than he was used to. But despite the exhaustion, Wade had never been happier. Watching Maggie nurse their son, seeing the gentle way she cradled Marcus and sang to him, filled Wade with a love so profound it sometimes overwhelmed him. This was his family. This was what he had been searching for all those years he had spent drifting from place to place. He had found it in the most unexpected way, pulling a drowning woman from a river and breathing life back into her lungs. And she had breathed life back into him, given him purpose and love, and now a son to carry on their legacy. As Marcus grew from an infant to a toddler, the homestead grew with him. Wade expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms, and built a proper barn for the growing herd of cattle. The vegetable garden became more ambitious each year, and Maggie started selling her excess produce in town. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When Marcus was 3 years old, Maggie became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and when their daughter was born in the summer of 1886, the labor was mercifully short. They named her Sarah Grace, and she was as beautiful as her brother, with Maggie's blue eyes and Wade's dark hair. Wade marveled at how quickly their family had grown. 4 years ago, he had been alone in the world, drifting with no real purpose. Now he had a wife he loved more than life itself, a son who was growing tall and strong, and a daughter who had already wrapped him completely around her tiny finger. Life was full and rich, and every day Wade thanked whatever providence had led him to that riverbank on that September morning in 1882. The years rolled by, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Marcus grew into a bright, curious boy who loved helping Wade with the cattle and learning everything he could about ranching. Sarah was her mother's shadow, always underfoot in the kitchen or the garden, learning to cook and sew and tend the plants. In 1889, Maggie gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas, and 2 years after that, a second daughter they called Elizabeth. The cabin had to be expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and Wade built a second floor with bedrooms for the children. The homestead was thriving. The cattle herd had grown to over 50 head, and Wade had added horses to their operation, breeding and training them for sale to the Army at Fort Verde and to other settlers in the valley. Through it all, Wade's love for Maggie never wavered. If anything, it grew deeper with each passing year. He loved watching her with their children, loved the way she had blossomed from the frightened, grieving young woman he had pulled from the river into a confident, capable wife and mother. He loved the way she still looked at him with those bright blue eyes, the way she still reached for his hand when they sat together in the evenings after the children were in bed. They would sit on the porch they had added to the front of the cabin, looking out over the land they had built together, and Wade would think about how far they had come. From that desperate morning by the river to this peaceful evening with their family sleeping safely inside, it had been a journey neither of them could have imagined. "You ever think about that day?" Maggie asked one evening, as if reading his thoughts. The children were all asleep, and they were enjoying a rare moment of quiet. "The day you pulled me from the river, all the time," Wade admitted. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had taken a different route that morning, if I had not been riding along the river at that exact moment. You would have died, and I would have gone on with my life, never knowing what I had missed." Maggie shuddered. "Do not think about that. It is too terrible." "I know," Wade said, pulling her closer. "But I cannot help it sometimes. That moment changed everything. You changed everything, Maggie. You gave me a reason to stop drifting, a reason to build something permanent. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. I was lost before I found you, and I did not even know it." Maggie turned to look at him, her eyes soft in the lamplight spilling from the cabin windows. "You saved my life that day, Wade. You breathed life back into me when I had given up, but you did more than that. You saved me from a life of loneliness and despair. You gave me a reason to keep going, to build something new from the ashes of what I had lost. We saved each other." Wade kissed her gently. "I suppose we did." "I love you," Maggie said. "More now than I did on the day we married, though I would not have thought that possible then." "I love you too," Wade replied, "more than words can say." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the valley. The chirping of crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft lowing of the cattle in their pasture. This was their life, the one they had built together from nothing, and Wade knew he would not trade it for anything in the world. The children grew and thrived. Marcus developed a natural talent with horses, and by the time he was 15, he was helping Wade train the animals they raised. Sarah proved to have her mother's gift for growing things, and the garden expanded under her care. Thomas was the wild one, always exploring and getting into mischief, while Elizabeth was thoughtful and studious, teaching herself to read from the books the family accumulated. In 1895, when Marcus was 20 years old, he announced his intention to marry a young woman from town, a rancher's daughter named Catherine. Wade and Maggie hosted the wedding at the homestead, and it was a grand affair with half the valley in attendance. Watching his son speak his vows, Wade was reminded of his own wedding day, of the simple ceremony in the Camp Verde church when he had pledged his life to Maggie. So much had changed since then, but the love he felt for his wife had only grown stronger. Marcus and Catherine built a cabin on the far side of the homestead, and Marcus continued to work the ranch with Wade. A year later, they welcomed Wade and Maggie's first grandchild, a boy they named Wade after his grandfather. Holding that tiny baby in his arms, seeing his own name carried forward to another generation, Wade felt a profound sense of completion. Sarah married 2 years after Marcus, wedding a young schoolteacher who had come to Camp Verde from back east. They settled in town, where the teacher had secured a position at the growing school, and Sarah helped him while continuing to supply the family homestead with plants and seeds. She gave Wade and Maggie 2 granddaughters in quick succession, both as lovely as their mother. Thomas, true to his wild nature, left home at 18 to try his hand at prospecting in the mountains. He returned a year later, broke but full of stories, and settled down to work the ranch with Wade and Marcus. He eventually married a widow with 2 children of her own, and they raised the family together on a section of the homestead that Wade divided off for them. Elizabeth was the last to marry, taking her time to find exactly the right man. She eventually wed a lawyer from Prescott, and they made their home there, though Elizabeth visited the homestead frequently, bringing her own growing family to stay for weeks at a time during the summer. As Wade moved into his 60s, he gradually turned more of the ranch operations over to Marcus and Thomas, though he still helped out when needed. He had more time now to spend with Maggie, and they treasured those quiet days together. They would ride out to their favorite spots on the homestead, places that held special memories, and talk about their lives, their children, their grandchildren. "We did well," Maggie said one afternoon as they sat by the Verde River, not far from where their cabin stood. "Look at what we built, Wade. 4 children, all happy and settled, 11 grandchildren and counting, a homestead that is prospering. We did well." "We did," Wade agreed. He was 62 now, his hair gone gray, his body showing the wear of decades of hard work, but he felt good, strong, blessed. "I never imagined I would have all this. I never imagined I could be this happy." Maggie took his hand, and Wade noticed the lines on her face, the silver in her hair that had once been so dark. She was 54 years old, and to Wade, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. "Do you ever regret it?" Maggie asked softly. "Giving up your life as a drifter to settle down here with me?" Wade turned to look at her, surprised. "Regret? Maggie, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Building this life with you has been the greatest joy I have ever known." "I do not regret a single moment." Maggie smiled, and it was the same smile that had captivated Wade all those years ago. "I needed to hear that. Sometimes I wonder if you ever think about what your life might have been like if you had kept drifting, if you had not stopped to pull a drowning woman from a river." "I think about it sometimes," Wade admitted, "but only to thank God that I did stop. Maggie, you are my life. You and our children and grandchildren, this homestead, this valley. Everything that matters to me exists because I found you that morning. I would not change a single thing." Maggie leaned against him, and Wade wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They sat together by the river, listening to the water flow past, the same water that had nearly taken Maggie's life but had instead brought her to Wade. It seemed fitting somehow that they would end up here, beside the river that ran through their land, reflecting on the life they had built together. The years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Wade and Maggie slowed down as age crept up on them, but their love never wavered. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other good morning and good night, still looked at each other with the same affection and devotion they had felt as newlyweds. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1923, the family threw a grand celebration at the homestead. All 4 children came with their families, and the homestead was overrun with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, ranging from infants to young adults. There was food and music and dancing, and at one point, Wade and Maggie stood together in the middle of it all, looking around at the family they had created. 40 years, Maggie said, shaking her head in wonder. "How did we get here so fast?" "I do not know," Wade replied. He was 72 now, and Maggie was 64, and they had both slowed down considerably. But Wade still felt young when he looked at Maggie, still felt the same rush of love he had felt on that riverbank all those years ago. "But I am glad we made the journey together." "So am I," Maggie said. She stood on her toes and kissed him, and Wade heard their children and grandchildren cheer and applaud. That night, after everyone had left and it was just the 2 of them again in the cabin they had built together, Wade and Maggie lay in their bed and talked about the life they had shared. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night after the funeral?" Maggie asked. "You said you would stay with me for as long as I would have you." "I remember," Wade said. "Well, I am not done having you yet," Maggie said, a teasing note in her voice. "So you are stuck with me a while longer," Wade chuckled. "I certainly hope so. I cannot imagine life without you, Maggie. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Maggie replied. "The man who pulled me from the river and breathed life into me. My rescuer, my husband, my love." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the way they had for 40 years, and Wade dreamed of rivers and second chances, of the moment his life had changed forever when he spotted a woman floating face down in the water. Wade Callahan lived to be 78 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1929 with Maggie at his side. The whole valley mourned his loss, for he had been a pillar of the community, a man respected for his integrity, his kindness, and his unwavering devotion to his family. Maggie lived another 6 years after Wade's death, long enough to see her great-grandchildren grow and thrive. She never remarried, saying that she had already had the great love of her life and needed no other. When she died in 1935 at the age of 76, she was buried next to Wade in the Camp Verde cemetery, their graves side by side just as they had lived their lives. On Maggie's headstone, her children had inscribed a simple epitaph: "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother." She was found floating face down in the river. He pulled her out and breathed life into her. Together, they built a legacy of love. The homestead remained in the Callahan family for generations, passed down through Marcus's line. The cabin was eventually replaced by a larger house, but the original structure was preserved as a reminder of where it all began. The family would gather there on special occasions, and the story of Wade and Maggie was told and retold. A tale of love born from tragedy, of two souls who found each other at exactly the right moment and built a beautiful life together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was just right, family members swore they could see two figures sitting on the old porch, hands clasped, looking out over the land they had loved. Whether it was memory or something more, no one could say for certain. But everyone agreed that if any love could transcend death, it would be the love of Wade and Maggie Callahan, the cowboy and the woman he pulled from the river, the man who breathed life into her, and the woman who gave him a reason to truly live. Their story became legend in the Verde Valley, a testament to the power of love and second chances, of fate and courage and the unbreakable bonds that form between two people who choose each other, day after day, year after year, for a lifetime and beyond. It was a story of the Wild West, of hardship and perseverance, of building something lasting from the ashes of loss. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple, the kind that people dream about and rarely find, the kind that Wade and Maggie were blessed to share for 40 wonderful years. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the hardships they had endured or the challenges they had overcome, but the love they had shared, the family they had created, and the legacy they had left behind. Wade Callahan had pulled Maggie Fletcher from the Arkansas River and breathed life back into her lungs, never knowing that she would spend the rest of her life breathing life back into him. Together, they had lived fully and loved completely, and their story would be remembered for generations to come, a bright spot of hope and happiness in the harsh landscape of the Old West, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, love can find a way.